I'm going to thump it some more.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
So when did you start running?
I started running in the 80s. Did not do any running, didn't do any sports in high school. I worked, I had a job uh, in high school, and I was actually working with a student who had a drug problem, and I was asking her to go a day without using, a day without smoking, a day with, whatever the case might have been. And she finally looked at me at one time, and I was heavy then. And she goes, "Oh, that's fine. Why don't you go a day without food?" So I lost weight. And during that process, I started running. And I thought I'd go out and do an easy mile, after dinner, which is the way I started. And I could not get to the end of my 125-foot driveway at the time. But it was a half mile around my block, and I just tried to run a little bit further every day. Doing this in the 80s and the early 90s, there were no cell phones. So it was, no one could get a hold of me. No one could bother me at that point. I was alone in my thoughts. And I enjoyed that solitude, if you will.
So what was running culture like back then?
Well, runners were not respected. You didn't belong on the roads. The roads belonged to cars. I had an instance where a passenger in the car, opened the passenger door to see if they could hit me as the car went by. And it's not like I was running out in the middle of the road. Back then, things were also a lot more casual. Races were very informal. One of the famous ones was a cookie race where, maybe the top 3 places would get cookies. And then those people usually shared the cookies with everybody who was there. Really an informal, but it was a different time.
So how did you develop an interest in coaching?
I have 2 very good friends of mine who are coaches. One of them is Dennis Lobo, Rebecca Lobo's dad, if you know anything about Connecticut basketball and the WNBA. And Mark Aquata, who often helped us out at GHI and sometimes at Stratton Brook. Mark was teaching with my wife. He's a phys ed teacher, and he was coaching cross country and outdoor track in Granby. I lived in Granby. My wife came home and said, "You're going to get a call from Mark. They're looking for a track coach, and he thinks you'd be a good addition." So, I'm a distance runner. What do I know about coaching track? Anyway, did get the call, subsequently agreed and thought I was going to be coaching distance runners. No, that was Mark coaching distance runners. They wanted me to be a jumps coach. Long jump, triple jump, high jump. Mark, I don't know anything about jumping. And Mark looked at me and he said, "Yeah, but I know you." He goes, "You'll know more than most coaches will within a month." And so I started coaching Granby track. Oh, by the way, the first week they told me I was also coaching pole vault, and I knew nothing about pole vault.
So what were you using to learn back then?
Books. I still have some of my original track manuals over there. Going back and reading articles on microfiche, if you even know what that is. Microfiche is like an index card with photograph miniature pages that were in magazines. So Sports Illustrated would have a number of articles on the 1976 Olympic jumpers and analyzing their styles, and then a critique by other people of those styles. And so I would read and I would try to pick up ideas. Now with the internet, it's good and bad because everything is out there. Nothing has been really edited in terms of what research says versus what somebody's opinion is. But both of them look as professional, So it's a lot more weeding that you have to do now. But the availability of critical material and research is unlimited.
You've mentioned this to me before, but can you talk a little bit more about your habit of self-evaluation after practices?
Let me say I learned this when I was teaching. I would always sit down certainly at the end of a day, and I would think about what went well and what didn't go well during the day. Oftentimes had multiple of the same class. Why did it go well in period 3 and period 5 I was doing the same thing, and it felt like I was doing it the same way, yet it was not as good an experience. From my point of view and from the feedback I was getting in class. That carried over when I started coaching.
What was it like assembling and managing a group of coaches for the track team?
One of the hardest things to do, I think, is to evaluate if somebody would make a good coach. I'm very fortunate in that the people that worked with me, never for me, with me, and for the team, work with the team, had the right attitude. I had people on staff at times that I tried to encourage to do more, to learn more. I started initially bringing coaches to coaches' workshops in Massachusetts or inside the state, and pay for it out of my own pocket. But get them up there, get them excited about learning new things. Always had in my coach's library books on techniques, videotapes, later on, CD discs, stuff that I would purchase and give to hey, take a look at this. Tell me what you think about it. What do you think about moving to the spin technique in discus as opposed to the glide? What do you think about this technique for the long jump? Do you think we ought to be emphasizing the hang as opposed to the step in the air technique? Things that give them stuff to think about, to evaluate, and to eventually use with kids. So my goal was always to find people who could fill holes, and if I couldn't find someone to fill a hole, that meant that's when I was coaching. And so I brought somebody on who would coach distance, even though that's sort of my love. And what I couldn't find was a pole vault javelin coach. Nobody knows how to throw a javelin. And so I became a javelin pole vault coach.
So did you have a preference in coaching cross country or track?
If you said to me which sport that I like coaching, from the standpoint of dealing with one personality type, cross country was easier. A lot more challenges in coaching track that I enjoyed. Talk about being a juggler with 5 objects in the air at all times. that was really true. And the year I took over both the boys and the girls team, and we had in excess of 200 kids, spreadsheets getting ready for meets were horrible. They were 200 lines long in my worksheet, in my Excel worksheet, 17 rows across. And you always had to make sure that nobody was in more events than were allowed, that they were all in their event that they wanted to be in, plus whatever events we needed them to do. So very challenging, very time-consuming. Track, more so, I think, than cross-country, is a black hole for time. It doesn't matter how much time you have, it's never enough from an organizational and learning perspective.
What was it like organizing large events like the Greater Hartford and Stratton Brook Invitational?
GHI, when you have 1,500 to 2,000 entry athletes in a meet, it's huge. It's complex. The planning for GHI next year started 7 days after the completion of the GHI this year. I had timelines worked out where certain things had to be done by certain times. By mid-July, the medals and plaques were all ordered for Stratton Brook. And I got a call 2 weeks before Stratton Brook. They never put the order in with the company making the medals, and they couldn't possibly get them to me on time. I felt like a failure. And it wasn't it wasn't because of me. But stuff happens, I told people, coaches weren't upset. I was annoyed because that's important to me. If you're giving out 20 JV medals in the JV race, then that kid deserves the medal that day, deserves to be honored. And now, yeah, you could call the kid up, but you couldn't give anything to the kid. Anyway, very annoying.
What effect did your science background have on your coaching?
First, let me say, I think that I learned more biology once I became a coach than I certainly knew in terms of anatomy and physiology and training. But having a science background the way I coached made a huge difference. It's a huge advantage. I mean, I used to get 5 or 6 newsletters a week on training or physiology or nutrition, variety of different topics. And I could look at those with the insight of my biology background. How can I adapt the training that they're doing with top-level college runners who are 21, 22, 23? How can I adapt that to a 15-year-old body, 16-year-old body? Maybe if you're lucky, you've still got one of those guys at 18 years old. It's an entirely different ballgame. So what do I need to do? Clearly, it became clear to me. I used to teach a coaching class at Green Mountain Running Camp for cross-country coaches. I would say, what's your job as a coach? And inevitably, you'd get some form of, well, my job is to train kids to run faster or to train kids to run. Okay. So how do you do that? And I'd finally look at them and say, what you're doing is you're training power systems in the body. understand what your job is. And inevitably, they told me the least successful part of the course was talking about the biology. I said, but now you know why, when you're doing X, you get a benefit. Not just do X because my coach did X. And because that's the way a lot of coaches coach. They coach the way they were coached. But they don't know why. And I would tell kids I coached, if you don't know why we're doing something, you ask me. And if I can't tell you, don't do it. My coaching was all about putting myself out of a job. I wanted kids to know what they needed to do to coach themselves, so they didn't need me. Because only a tiny fraction of them were going to get coaching in college. Most of them, weren't going to be athletes in college. And what is it? Less than 1% go on from even those who were in college to go beyond that.
What did you want your athletes to learn through running or participating in athletics?
The biggest thing I think an athlete can learn, and what I certainly wanted my athletes to learn, was more about themselves. What am I capable of? Am I capable of more than I think that I am? And the answer to that question for almost everyone is yes. I can't say it's got to be a blanket on 100%. But we all tend to underestimate our own abilities. And I don't really care what venue we're talking about this now. We also tend to feed ourselves negatives. I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm not thin enough. I'm not muscular enough. I'm not strong enough. And we limit our own ability. That self-fulfilling prophecy, as it is, becomes true. The old expression of if you think you can and you think you can't, you're probably right. It's very true. I had the most difficult time with athletes on the team that literally did not want someone to do better because they thought somehow that made them worse. And it's simply not true, because you should never be comparing yourself to anybody else on the team, only yourself. And you should be working together. That should be a synergism. A team should always be a synergism. So I think athletics is a key to learning how to work with other people, learning how to take direction, learning how to accept responsibility, learning consistency, because that to me is the key to becoming a good athlete, is consistent work. It's not going out and doing a hell of a workout one day and taking the next 2 days off and become a couch potato. Those are the lifelong lessons. That's the important stuff. It's funny, Kevin, that if you ask me what my record was, I cannot tell you. I can go look it up because I had to fill it out on paperwork at times. I can tell you the year we won the state open in cross country. I know we won the state class championship 3 times in a row because all the articles talked about the three-peat. I can't tell you how many conference champions we had, state champions we had, state team championships we had. How many seasons did we go undefeated? Not important to me. It was to some people. There are some coaches who know that. Not to me. Because that's not the important aspect of, to me, why we have sports in school.
I asked a few people if they had any questions for you, and Tom wanted me to ask you to explain two things that you had commonly told us. One of them was why wet leaves could be as slippery as ice.
Yep. Okay, wet leaves. All right. You run across country in the autumn, leaves fall. Leaves get wet. What grows between them is called slime mold. And if you step on it, that top leaf, you're going to slide. All right? And so my point was, you always want to be on the midfoot. You don't want to land on your heels, because if your foot slips and you're on your midfoot, you go to your heel. If you're on your heel, you go to your butt. So slime mold is very real, and leaves do get as slippery as ice. Ice is irregular on the surface, okay? Because stuff gets caught in it. It's not, ice frequently isn't all that slippery, especially if you're wearing spikes, okay? But you get a pile of leaves this thick and you're wearing, what, 3/16 inch spikes, even a 1/2 inch spike, you're not going through the whole pile and into the ground.
He also wanted me to ask you about your heart rate not rising when you go up a hill and push the downhill.
It will actually go down. Yes, and that's supported by medical research. You can push, you go up a hill and you push over the hill. You crest the hill, you don't rest on the hill, okay? You crest the hill and push on the downhill. Almost no matter how hard you push going down the hill, your heart rate will go down, because you've been fighting gravity all the way up, all right? So the heart's already pumping. It's pumping an adequate supply, and now you're going faster going down the hill. The thing you got to worry about is overstriding. For a while, we used to use heart rate monitors, and the guys would see that. They would go up mother, and their heart rates would skyrocket. And when you get to the end of mother, it's flat, and then you'd go down double choppers, and their heart rate would go down no matter how hard they push going down that hill. So it works.
What do you think are some of the most important qualities of a good coach?
Willingness to learn, willingness to evaluate the way you've done things and be willing to change. Like kids, like working with kids, as frustrating as they can be at times. Willingness to change is important. I've had some very complimentary people in my life. And I remember a couple of my athletes once asking me, when did I know I knew it all? And I said, I'll let you know when it happens. When I thought that I knew it all is when I started really learning what I didn't know. Stuff changes. I would often hear my older athletes come back, after 10 years, wow, you're so much easier on them than you were on. No, I'm not. I am, but different. Yeah, it's different. I was stupid when you were here. So,
Can you think of something that you learned from your athletes?
Don't try to create perfection. Kobe was one of those kids I had to hold back because he always wanted to do too much. And he could do a really tough workout, a killer workout, 48 hours. He's totally recovered, ready to go. And I remember before the cross-country class championships, we were at Wickham on Tuesday, doing a workout. And he had a great workout, but we had to cut it short for some reason, and I don't remember why. But he did a great workout. And I said, if I could just do a little bit more with him, I really think he has the ability to be all-state. I was sure, top 10 in the race. But I didn't, and I don't remember the specifics, but I didn't get something accomplished in that workout on Tuesday. And I said, you know what? He's always recovered in 48 hours. And on Thursday, we did something, and he didn't recover on Saturday. And he finished maybe 34th or something. And that's on me. And I was trying to get that perfect peak. And I learned that day, on that Saturday, that there is no perfection. Just aim for excellence and let the chips fall where they may. And I've learned a lot from kids. Sometimes something you say makes a huge difference. Up at camp, I used to try to get some time with each of my athletes who went to camp and be able to sit down and have a conversation with them. And I can remember a conversation with this one gentleman on the team who said to me, I want to be a top runner. And I looked at him and I said, so do you think you deserve to be a top runner? I found out years later that made a huge difference in his life. That he actually thought about that and said, yeah, I do. I do deserve it. He became an award-winning distance runner, went to one of the service academies, West Point specifically, later became a Ranger in the Army. And that, just that question, that yes, he deserved that. He put it, and I said it to him knowing that he did. Always working hard, always being the first one to volunteer. Okay? And I just wanted to know if he knew it. And that night he didn't know it, but he did think about it, and it made a difference. Hopefully my athletes learned more than how to run. with me. So